It was in the 1980s. A group of women in Caroline County actually came together and said that was when people started talking about what are we going to do to help victims of domestic violence. There was no federal funding, there was no state funding. They kind of came together, created this nonprofit. And it was around the 1980s when really that happened around the country. That was when we started having this conversation about needing help. So that's when Midshore was incorporated and started with the group of women in Caroline County. And we were like every other crisis program. Our job was to get victims who were fleeing in the middle of the night or needed to get away from abusers to safety. And so we opened up crisis shelters. We started managing 24-hour hotlines, and that hotline continues today. It's 1-800-927-4673. And then Midshore really recognized that there were other needs. We needed to get a divorce, or you needed legal help. So I think Midshore, within 6 years of incorporation, received funding to have attorneys represent our clients in protective orders. And then that evolved. The laws changed. You were able to get more and more relief out of a protective order. It was not just for a short period of time, but up to a year. So we've expanded our panel. And so now we have a panel of over 30 attorneys from each of the 5 counties that we serve who represent our clients in these final protective orders and divorce and custody. And that's probably one of the that and our hotline are the most utilized services because it's the next step for victims. Yes. And that's really been a focus of Midshore, is to evolve over the years, to move from, we do crisis really well. That's what we meant to do. We'll always do it. But there's a reality facing victims is after you get to crisis, how do you move beyond? And the unfortunate statistic was victims would go back 5 to 8 times before they actually left. And in my opinion, especially here in the rural areas, there's many barriers, right? It's not as easy. You have kids to think about, you have your jobs to think about, you have transportation. We also have victims who are in the role of caregivers of families because they're part of larger families. One of our issues with our clients are pets. A lot of our clients have pets and they're part of the culture here on the shore. They're part of the businesses in some capacity. There's a relationship, and we have land where we can have a lot of pets. So that was a big barrier for our clients from leaving. What about our pets? So just for an example, so Midshore now is a pet sheltering program. You can leave with your pets. We have funding from Banfield where we could pay vet appointments, provide food for the pets, because with these rising costs, can you afford pet food when you leave? So these really looking at these individual barriers has been a tremendous success for Midshore. We have evolved we get victims to crisis, but we see that as the beginning of the journey, not the beyond end all. So we're helping them all the way through a transition phase to self-sufficiency. We do economic empowerment work. We've really identified back in 2016 that the biggest hole victims had were a large credit card debt, or landlord-tenant issues, or they had to declare bankruptcy, or they left and the abuser wiped them out of all of their money, or they were never part of the business, or they didn't pay the taxes. I mean, I've had victims say I not only left, but I left in $40,000 debt. So we now have in our panel of attorneys, economic empowerment attorneys, so they've specialized in these cases that help victims get out of those financial holes. It's been tremendous. We had one client who, in a bankruptcy negotiation, he was able to get her $95,000 debt totally forgiven. And think about that, changed her life. She could sign a loan, she could get a lease, she could move on. So I think Midshore and we're now recognized as the Empowerment Center in Maryland because of our model, and I think as a whole, as a movement, we need to get out of that siloed of this is what we do. We just get them to crisis. And I think Midshore has been a champion for those victims to say, look outside the box, look at what I need and get me on that pathway that's very personalized to me. And so I'm really proud of Midshore and how we've evolved to take the victims' information, feedback, and grow and change accordingly. Well, they've been a longtime supporter. Initially, back in 2018, they started funding our support groups. Now, most recently, out of our focus groups, our clients, and I've been in this field a long time, I knew that food was a controlling issue, but to hear the clients talk about how often that occurs in the type of a food of power and control, like withholding food, or we actually have clients who give us pictures of a lock across the refrigerator. They are not allowed to have access to it, even for milk for their kids. So the Women and Girls Fund funds all of our food pantries. So
This group's been around for 40 years, the Midshore Council on Family Violence. It's pretty impressive. And I can remember, back in the day when I was in the state's attorney's office in Caroline, they were newly minted and doing great work. Pretty amazing. You were asking me how long we've been supporting them. We've been around for 20 years. And I want to say it was perhaps in 2006 or 7 that we started giving them grants, and various kinds of grants. Some were for emergency client funds, one-time emergencies. Others were for empowerment training. And the last couple of years, and we're finding that this is happening in many organizations, is that food is so important. If you don't have anything in your stomach, then where do you go from there?